lot of international investors, that perception of the market for Pakistan has become increasingly more risky. And then now we add the other layer of Pakistan being the market that they're building in. There are so many problems that founders in Pakistan have to solve on a daily basis. It's the reason they're probably building their business in the first place, is to solve some of the problems that they face on a daily basis.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Digital Rights series for DawnNews English. My name is Farieha Aziz. I have with me today Kalsoom Lakhani. She's a general partner at I2I Ventures. Thank you, Kalsoom, for joining DawnNews English to discuss the recent internet disruptions and also, of course, the impact that it has had on the digital economy. We've heard a lot from local industry about the impact and the financial losses, but if you could tell us about the perception in the international community, especially with respect to inviting investment, how are we being viewed? How is Pakistan being viewed internationally as a result of these disruptions, and also speculation that firewalls or network filtering and monitoring equipment is being deployed?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think what's really important when we take this current situation into play, it's actually in the context of the last 2 years, because when we think about international investors looking at the market, and these are mostly who I'm referring to specifically are venture capital investors who invest in early stage companies that are starting out, that are high growth. We've seen that happen all over the world. And when we take into account all the last 2 years, we've seen a dramatic drop in international investors in Pakistan. So when we look at, 2021, 2022, startups raised $350 million in funding, $355 million in funding. Those were record years, a reflection of what was happening globally as well in emerging markets. But then we saw that significantly drop in 2023, so $78 million in funding from $355 million. This year to date, startups have only raised a disclosed just a little over $10 million in funding. So that drop is actually a reflection of how international investors are also looking at the market. And a lot of that has to do with the macro uncertainty that has been happening for the last 2 years. So first, there's the global macro uncertainty that's been happening, and that impacted international investors, their liquidity, and how they were deploying capital into markets like Pakistan. But Pakistan itself obviously has been dealing with a lot of political instability, a lot of macroeconomic instability, and then obviously things like, social media platform bans that have been happening. Obviously, we're seeing things that from X more recently, but we've seen the TikTok bans happen. We're seeing the throttling of the internet that's happening right now, that's impacting people that use WhatsApp for business, which a lot of startups do. All of that to say is that a lot of international investors, that perception of the market for Pakistan has become increasingly more risky. And that is impacting why or how they're deciding to deploy money into companies that are building for the market, right? And I think what's really interesting is that the potential for Pakistan hasn't changed. When we look at the potential of the Pakistan market that was being sold 2 years ago, all of that holds true today. The large population, large youth population, the problems that they're trying to solve. The challenge is that the risks are becoming increasingly higher given the current digital market obstacles that are happening right now. And so all of that is impacting why and how they're deciding to deploy. And right now, for me as an investor that is focused on Pakistan, but also work with a lot of international investors, it's the uncertainty that's really killing investor mindset as well as their appetite.
Got it. And so the instability in which you said is that and especially because you worked with the startup community, you still do, in terms of typically your investment pitch for a startup or entrepreneur based in Pakistan, and how do you see, now if you were to go to an investor, how would that significantly, in terms of what they are going to ask you for guarantees and certainties, and why this is a viable market to invest in, how does that change?
Honestly, it's a very hard sell right now. I think Pakistan has become an increasingly hard sell as a market in the last year or so, right? In terms of you're basically acting from a place of being defensive about what's happening and showing that startups are able to still achieve great numbers and do things in spite of the situation, not because of the market itself, right? Which if you spoke to investors 2 years ago, a lot of the numbers that we were showing were coming from a place of, being aspirational and positive about the market numbers and saying that this is what we can achieve because Pakistan is like this. And right now what we're saying is that in spite of all of these things, Pakistanis are able to achieve this. But I think the lack of certainty, the lack of the ability to say why things are happening, which is in the current situation, we don't really know what's happening. We don't know how long it's going to last. And I think that does not help the sell when you're speaking to investors that are, when we're trying to pitch to other investors in the startups that we're currently invested in, when we're trying to help our companies raise funding. That is just that is the uphill battle, right? We have to sell the in spite of, and whenever you sell being on the defensive of something, it is a much harder thing to achieve, right? It's much harder to get people over the finish line. So if anything, it's about startups saying, a lot of what we've seen actually in the last year is startups going to other markets, diversifying outside of Pakistan. If they were in Pakistan alone, they're going to places like the UAE and Saudi Arabia to show that diversification in order to mitigate some of the risk associated with the market right now. And that's not a great place to be, right? We should be able to sell Pakistan on that front foot of what Pakistan on its own is able to achieve, which is this large addressable market, a large youth population, increase internet connectivity, which right now is very much a question mark.
And do you think there's going to be any concerns? So one is we're experiencing slow internet speeds, right? The other is, like you said, that you don't have a timeline. When is this going to get fixed? You don't have the authorities telling you one thing, they're giving contradictory statements. There's not going to be any regulatory certainty. The other aspect of this is the kind of things that are being deployed or that we are hearing of, and from a data privacy point of view, because internationally there was concern voiced about, the data protection bill, and also the kind of data, the access to data. Do you think that what they are hearing and reading, and possibly some of these technical deployments, even though the government is saying everybody does it, which of course we know is not true in the same way, do you think this is also going to concern investors in terms of data privacy and and companies, especially when they give business to Pakistani, startups or entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and we've seen other markets that have deployed similar policies for those companies in those markets be able to raise funding. I think it's, from my standpoint, the way that I would look at it is, for international investors looking at this market is like, and this is unfortunate or fortunate, right, in terms of how they probably lay on the ethical, moral standpoint, but for them, it's a bottom line issue, right? Like, does this impact the bottom line? Does the uncertainty about this, does the lack of certainty around data privacy, or not really having a sense of, how things are protected, does that impact the bottom line of this business? And I believe it does, right? In terms of, because of the lack of certainty, we can't predict things. And I think with venture capital specifically as an asset class, it's the most risky asset class when you invest in startups, right? Because that, 9 out of 10 times these companies are going to fail. So the more you can create certainty with a market, the better.
And what kind of feedback have you received from, the startups or entrepreneurs you've been working with, also the ones that you're trying to get investment for, in terms of their inability to, because there's this sense that, okay, well, why, you can just find alternates. Now, how difficult is it just to find alternates for an internet connection or a platform that you have to migrate from, right? And these kind of issues come with costs attached and all kinds of things. So what are the specific difficulties that they're facing in this environment?
I mean, if you think about it, someone building a startup is hard enough, right? Anywhere in the world, 99% of companies fail. If you think about, if you add another layer to that and you say that you're a startup in an emerging market, that is increasingly harder to build a successful company. And then now we add the other layer of Pakistan being the market that they're building in. There are so many problems that founders in Pakistan have to solve on a daily basis. It's the reason they're probably building their business in the first place, is to solve some of the problems that they face on a daily basis. But to add on top of that, these are not, when we have so many problems that they're trying to fix, things that are fixable, right? Things that we can create certainty around, like internet connectivity. When we're especially trying to be a digital market, these are the things that are not stuff that they should have to find a solution around, right? So as much as what they're being told is like, just go find another workaround, given all the other things they have to work around, this should not be one of them, right? This is something that I believe it's a basic human right. It's something that people should have, that sense of good connectivity in the markets that they're in. And the impact of not having that connectivity is huge. We've seen for businesses already, especially companies that are in the IT export space, companies that are, freelancers, people that are freelancers, given the fact that we have 500,000 freelancers in Pakistan alone and how they're being impacted. And a lot of startups in the market use things like call centers, have delivery riders, all of those things are being impacted on a daily basis. And so to be told that you just have to find another workaround on top of all the other workarounds that you have to do in the market that you're operating in is honestly, it's unfair.
Because I'm finally going towards, so even if this normalizes, let's say, right, the internet speeds go back to normal, etc. What do you think is the damage that's been done? Is it reversible in terms of the impact? I mean, not just monetary, but reputational damage, or the perception of Pakistan as a digital market in the international community?
Yeah, I mean, anything can be reversible because everyone's memories are short term, right? So, I mean, that's the unfortunate thing we've seen even with the news cycle, is that you can change the way that we look at this market in the future if we do things that feel that there's stability, if there's certainty, if we can actually show what we say, if we can actually prove and execute the way that we're saying we want to be, what we want the market to look like. But I think the challenge right now is just a sense of not really knowing, right? So even if things were to revert back, right, it's a sense of not really knowing what even caused this to begin with. How can we know that this won't happen again? How can we show, as an investor for the market, when I speak to other investors outside, how can I be certain myself, and then as the result say to other people that this will not happen again, right? And obviously there's huge economic losses that have happened, especially for the freelancer space, especially for players in the IT space, but also for the startup space. And so those losses are there, and because we can't really predict what will happen in the future unless we can really, show that certainty, it's really hard to sell the market.
Thank you, Kalsoom, for joining us today, DawnNews English. This is something that we're going to continue to watch as so-called, if it does normalize, but obviously there has been considerable impact, whether it's perception, financial losses. And this is something that the government has to bear in mind, that you can't just keep getting away with non-disclosure, because this is hurting business, this is hurting Pakistan's perception. You can't on the one hand want to invite investment and then allow this to happen. Thank you, Kalsoom, and this is all for today. We'll probably do another edition after.